welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast.
Hey Matt, welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast. How are we doing?
I'm doing good, thanks, Danny. Cheers for having me.
Hey, no, pleasure is all mine, my friend. So I guess before we crack on, I tend to ask my guests to pick 4 numbers from 1 to 100, Matt. So could you do that for me, please?
Oh, shit, that's more pressure than I was expecting at the start. Okay, let's go 13.
Yeah.
25.
Okay.
7.
Yeah.
And 64.
Perfect. We will come back to them a little bit later on. So Matt, I guess, the kind of follow-up question is always asking my guests kind of how to summarise herself in the log line. Can you remember the log line what you had?
Yeah, so my log line is probably the least likelihood of learning you'll ever see.
Okay. That's interesting. So we will come back to that for sure. But I guess, Matt, let me take you right back to when you was a little kid. And the teacher would say to you, Matthew or Matt, depending on how clicky you was to be a teacher, what is it you want to be when you grow older? What is it you would say to the teacher?
Now, I think I'm plagiarising David James here a bit, but it was a rock star.
A rock star? Okay.
Yeah. Ever since I was about 8 years old, I came across a Buddy Holly tape and was just obsessed with Buddy Holly ever since then. And then my brother brought home some Nirvana CDs when I was about 11. I never looked back.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I think I've seen that. I've seen that kind of, that music passion of yours as well in your presentations. I think you did one, was it last year, around music and stuff as well? I think it was at the Learning Tech, I think.
Yeah, I think if I've got a chance to put Dylan into a presentation, I probably will.
Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. So I guess these questions are going to come at you a little bit thick and fast. I mean, a little, some kind of chilled ones. But first thick and fast question, I'm going to give you 4 terms, and I want you to tell me the first thing what comes to mind when I say these.
Cool. Okay.
First one is agile.
Misunderstood.
Okay. Blended learning.
Awesome when you get it right.
Okay. Classroom.
Don't knock it.
Okay. And the last one is media zoo.
A fun place.
Okay. So I think we'll touch on them a little bit later on down the line.
Sure.
So yeah, kind of break down this this tagline of yours. Then walk me through what made you kind of go with that one.
Yeah. I've been working in L&D for about 13 years now. So it's an odd one, but I was reflecting on this the other week and in my early 20s when I was working in an office in a corporate L&D team, being an L&D designer, a little bit entitled because I had a job, the job name of learning consultant or whatever. I'd read a few books and had a bit of theory, but I wasn't very good at it. But really, I was just dreaming of, paying my rent, booking my next ticket to Morocco to go surfing, or the next gig I was going to play at or go to, really. So the last thing I ever wanted to do when I was reading the 7 Habits or whatever that my boss said I should read, I didn't care about any of it, and I never thought I'd see myself as that kind of corporate leader, person who loved this kind of industry.
Okay. So actually, it kind of brings us on to kind of in a smooth, subtle way. Matt, we speak to each other on LinkedIn, and when we're at conferences, we try and get a bit of time with each other, but. Maybe if you could give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of kind of where you've come from to kind of where you are now. And let my audience know a little bit about kind of your journey so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a lot like other people in the fact of I fell into L&D, started working with a BT training team as an administrator when I was pretty young. Had a few jobs in retail straight out of school, a few misstarts, misfires. And was very lucky that my manager in that role was really, really keen on developing, his team. And they got me playing around with the PowerPoints and rewriting content. And then actually just sort of one day, someone was sick and said, "Hey, do you want to try and deliver this webinar? Here's the scripts, here's the FAQs, kick off and do it." And it really sort of opened my eyes to a more interesting way of working and getting out of those kind of jobs where you do the same thing day in, day out. And within that role, we started playing around with Storyline, or Articulate was pre-Storyline, when it was still a plugin for PowerPoint. And it was a contract role, and I finished there, went traveling for a bit, and then came back. And someone had gone to Kineo, and they were looking for freelancers. And that kicked off a really huge part of my kind of experience of developing e-learning content for a few kind of the big agencies in the UK, which I did on and off for sort of 5 or 6 years after that. There was a bit where I was sat in a room, I hadn't spoken to anyone for 3 days in person, and I lost the plot, and I decided I wanted to be a primary teacher. So I jumped off to Bristol, to UE for a bit to try and do a teaching degree, and then learnt that formal education just isn't for me. But did like a year qualification there, learnt a lot about the psychology of children, and actually how I really don't think it's entirely different to the psychology of adults from a point of view of learning. We're just as impatient, just as difficult to control, but then just as easy to excite by a box with a lid closed. So I learned quite a lot from that. But then, then came back into kind of L&D, so I wasn't sure what else to do. Had a brief stopgap where I worked for the Olympics in 2012, which was a fascinating job and just an amazing experience, but where I did about 3 years worth of work in 6 months and vowed never to do it again. And after that, I sort of ended up in an internal L&D team where I was doing strategy and delivery, or digital content, and learned a lot about, expectation of roles, and started to grow up a little bit. And really started to realize that the reason I hadn't got on with the industry very much was because of my capability, not because of what was happening around me. And so it started on a bit of a journey then, and really opened my eyes and was thinking about things in a different way. Met a certain Perry Timms around that time who completely transformed the way I looked at things. And then, ended up at MediaZoo, and I've been there for 5.5 years now. Started off as a learning designer, just loved that kind of agency lifestyle and working for a company that was film and PR based, just stepping into the world of L&D. So they were kind of learning from me as much as I was learning from them. And then really, really lucky to have taken over the team about 2.5 years ago. And sort of just been playing and having loads of fun since.
Okay, so it's interesting, kind of, you talk about kind of, I guess, e-learning and stuff kind of from the start. What's your take on kind of e-learning now? And I want to jump into this, was it the Olympics you mentioned as well?
Yeah.
I want to jump into that. So maybe let's do the Olympics one first, actually. So what was the role at the Olympics? Like what was you doing there?
So I was working with the passes the athletes wear.
Oh yeah.
Basically accreditation, they call it. And so I ran accreditation desks at various locations, like the airport. So we had volunteers sat at the desks, and then they'd meet the games family, so the athletes, the referees, the coaches, off the planes, and they'd give them their passes there and then, rather than doing it somewhere else. So it was just a massive project management job, and a fascinating experience in Heathrow Airport saying no, and then having to call the Home Office and get them to tell Heathrow to let us to do things. It was an exercise in bureaucracy. So if you ever saw that TV show, I think it was called 2012. It was literally like it's like they had spies.
Fair enough. And then I guess kind of going from that, and then you touched upon a little bit about the e-learning, and e-learning has a bad rap. Has a bad rep. Sorry. So I mean, I'm the first one to kick it. I've kind of stepped away from kicking it now. But I guess what's your take on and when I say e-learning, I necessarily mean the typical click next, blah blah blah. But what's your take on well, it's two things really. What's your take on e-learning in general, and what's your take on the perception of e-learning by our industry, maybe?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a fascinating one, especially in the position I'm in, because I don't believe in e-learning. But if I took that position with our clients, I think we'd have no clients overnight. So it's a really, really fascinating dichotomy of how can we help improve the quality of what we're creating for our clients versus what they'd buy elsewhere. And that's what drives a lot of my decision making. So I think in an ideal world, I'd destroy all L&D and we'd have no training teams ever. Being quite mischievous.
Yes.
But I work in a company that has no formal L&D, and we're doing really well. And I think it's proof that exposure and reflection and challenge are huge drivers of development. And you don't have to have courses and structures and all kind of things like that. But that being said, it works for some people. It doesn't necessarily for me. But the industry's perception, I think, it's shifting. I wish we were a little bit more self-aware about how bad what we create is or what we have created. But I appreciate people have got whole careers and there's a lot of science behind lots of what happens. But I'm in an amazing position where I've worked with hundreds of big British companies and I've seen their content. And luckily everyone's at a pretty level playing field where it can all be improved.
I agree. It's probably the short answer. I think, we was kind of talking before we pressed record about, my take on where L&D is, and I think it shouldn't, again, matches yours, it shouldn't, I don't think it needs to exist. The rebel in us kind of wants to take that out and see what happens. But I guess it's an interesting debate, especially when you kind of look at, say, if you're in the consultancy world and whatever else, and you see these other little boutiques slowly but surely coming in on what would normally be perceived as a L&D kind of playing field. I think slowly but surely you've seen marketing companies coming in now and try and take a little bit of that turf, and yeah, I think it's an interesting one to watch, because if L&D doesn't shape up as a whole, then all these little boutique kind of functions or whatever, companies kind of come in and slowly but surely will start kind of eating the turf up of what L&D is at and where we're at now.
Yeah, and I think we need to be careful that, having an understanding of how we learn and having a deliberate set of actions about trying to help people do things differently over a sustained period of time is really, really important. And we shouldn't lose sight of what L&D is, or, what learning kind of is as an industry, because it is important and it is deliberate. But I think a lot of where we're at right now, and there's plenty of people who talk about this, is that we've created a world where we're creating content for the sake of, because a manager needs it or says they want it, and we're not really looking at the root cause, and we're not working with outcome focused projects. And I think that's the reason things have gotten a bit lost, and that's why there's tons and tons of content out there that's just not being used.
Yeah, you kind of just got me thinking there. I remember a couple of years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I was at a conference, and literally every single speaker got up and went, yeah, it's content, context and curation. And I kind of I remember putting a post out thinking, surely there should be another C in there, because everything seems to be lined up with C, content, And it's interesting now, this kind of what we're seeing is probably the reverse of that, and saying actually it's not content. It's actually being really specific with your content and making sure it's of value. It's kind of that. It's interesting to see how that's probably turned, and really in what 2 or 3 years, that's quite a short time frame to go from one end to the other end of an opinion.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of what makes things really interesting, isn't it? That everything is evolving, and people's views as they learn or try out more things, and I'm sure that if you called me in 2 years' time, I'll be saying something very different to what I am now. I think the most dangerous people in the industry are the ones with a fixed mindset.
Yeah.
Or sorry, a fixed position. Let's not get into mindset.
Yeah, and you spot on. It's them people who get so attached to their opinion that they can't step out and go, actually, new evidence has come in and my opinion's changed. It's interesting how we're all adults, and yet we can't have that adult moment of going, new information, new evidence. Okay, my opinion was wrong. I'm going to have a look at this opinion now. and we become really fixed, like you said, on what that is.
Yeah, and I get it if you've invested a lot of time and things into it. I've been really lucky that I think for a long period of my career I was making crap, and I'm not afraid to admit it, and I'm really really driven on undoing that. So if I'm wrong, or if someone points something out or shows me something new, I love it, and I'm more than happy to admit that I'm always evolving and always playing with new stuff.
And I think that's where mindset comes into it. I think it comes down to two things. I think it comes down to set and setting. So I think you've got your personal mindset, and by the sounds of it, Matt, you've got one which is open like a sponge, and it's open to new ideas and whatnot, and open to people's opinions as well, which is vital. But then it's a setting, and it sounds like where you're at right now is a good setting to allow that to kind of evolve. But I guess kind of coming from that, and actually maybe you could give us a bit of an insight into what a day in the life of Matt looks like at Media Zoo.
It's a good question. It's kind of fun. I think we've just got ourselves a new office at Media Zoo, so the learning team are all in one place, which is really cool. But my role is super varied. I'm like the ultimate generalist these days. But a day usually involves catching up with the team, checking in with different projects that I'm execing, and inevitably I'll probably be meeting clients for sales, or just kind of supervising or supporting projects really. But my days are, I don't really know what I'm expected to do, or what's going to come up. So I sort of joke that I haven't been in control of my calendar for 2 years now.
Okay, fair enough. So how big is Media Zoo? And is it kind of in a one-stop shop, or is it a few different offices, or?
We've got there's actually 3 offices in our London site now, all in Imperial Wharf, just on the Thames. And I've got 2 offices. So we've got an embedded team in one office, the main team in another, and then our film and PR team are based, or film and PR teams are based in the main office still. And then we opened a Glasgow office about 18 months ago.
Okay.
So it's sort of going strong in lots of different ways. But Media Zoo is about 100 plus people now in total.
That's pretty impressive, right? It's kind of so. How many have you kind of took on in the last probably 2 years? Is it just a constant growth at the moment then with Media Zoo, I take it?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I took over as head of, the learning team was 5 people, and now we're about 36. Okay. So it's been an amazing journey. I wish sometimes it would be a bit steadier, but it's been so cool just learning new things and just getting new clients, doing really interesting projects and facing new challenges all the time.
Oh, nice. Sounds awesome. So I kind of want to pick up on something what you said a little bit earlier on about you built some crap in your time or whatever, when you started out or whatnot. And I think it's a really interesting thing to kind of pull out. I think we talk about how, on interviews, we have to talk about, the best work, what we did, and, me, and all the stuff I've done. But actually, I think the better question is to ask is actually, what does your failures look like? If I asked you to write out a failure CV, what would that look like? So I guess with that kind of that question going on in your mind, what kind of key failure jumps out to you on your failure CV?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. When I was freelance and I was building, developing content, I was getting sent scripts and images, and I was building them to a style guide. No idea who the client was, no idea what needed to be made. It was probably one of 40 modules that was getting translated into 20 languages, and I was just part of a chain. And it sort of really, really made me question what we're doing in L&D. How could this have the benefit to people? Because it's just text, and a little image. And bearing in mind, this was, mid 2000s, so internet speeds weren't great, and so video and things weren't being used a lot. But I'd worked at corporates and seen this content, and you want to die inside. and you're forced to do it because they'll find a reason to make it mandatory. And every time I see content like that, it reminds me that I was a part of making it for quite a while. So, that's a real something that, as I say, but I use it as motivation to want to make sure that everything that we do is a bit different to what you'd buy from someone else, I think, rather than saying better, because that's unfair. But we can't prove any of those things, but what we can do is that we can think differently and try out new things. But you know what, the biggest one for me recently is being a manager. Every day I get something massively wrong with the team, and it's such a big challenge, but so rewarding at the same time.
Okay. So kind of flipping that question on its head. And actually, this can be personal. These questions, Matt, they can be personal, they can be professional, they can be wherever you want to take them. But what's been your biggest personal / professional success? And probably let's cap it. Let's put a 12 month over the last 12 months. And just because it's my podcast, let's make it personal. Hey, why not?
In the last 12 months, I think it's always for me the kind of the obvious one, which is with bands and recording things, and then it's on Spotify and you hear it back, and the culmination of what you and your friends have done and the time you put into it, being able to listen back to it and it being there for posterity, is an awesome feeling.
So are you in a band, I take it?
I haven't been for about 12 months now because work.
Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, for most of my adult years, I've always had a creative outlet outside of work. I think it's really important.
Okay. So I guess my challenge is, what's Matt going to do for having that creative outlet for the next 12 months? Do you have any ideas of what you're going to do kind of personally to kind of, give you creative wings, span to kind of carry on? Have you got any plans with that? Or
I've always thinking I've got an EP inside me, like a personal project, and sort of. So I think I need to put in some time into that. But one thing I've been really getting into again recently is writing.
Okay.
I write constantly for work. Always doing proposals, updates. I'm constantly posting on LinkedIn as well. But I haven't really done any long form writing for myself in a long time. So that's something that I kind of like to sit down and do and start to play with.
So if I was to kind of ask you a book, what shaped you, and a book what you have to give to 5 people as a gift, what book would that be?
Right now I keep reading non-fiction, so it's but you know what, it would have to be something like On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
Okay.
Sort of open my eyes to just seeing the world in a more philosophical way.
Okay, I don't think I've ever read that, so I'll add that one to my list for sure. So I kind of want to touch upon the things which we said at the beginning around kind of agile and whatnot. So I think the first one we said was agile, and your take on it was it misunderstood, I think? Something like that. Go for it, explain that one.
How many hours have you got? So we've been working with agile for about 4 years now. And we got it really, really wrong. And we played with it, experimented, and we've got a pretty unique kind of process, the dev process, I should say. So it's really, really far from pure agile, but it's takes all the elements that work for us. I guess when we talk to other people about it, it sounds sexy. We're selling it, saying that it's more flexible, you can get better outcomes, and actually one of the bits is you can make things faster. Quite often comes is we can skip the planning phase. It feels like, again, it's just another panacea for people. But I've been there, and we've seen how badly it can go wrong when you get it wrong. So it's something that needs care and love and understanding.
Okay. Okay, and then I think the other one which jumped out to me was blended learning, and your opinion on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think blended learning should be the basis for everything, right? There's, I don't want to waste my time in classrooms, but we've tried doing all digital content, and it's inhuman. Um, but the thing about blended that I'm really passionate about is the implementation, and I think it's the bit we always ignore. We can create assets all day long, but you give them to a manager or someone who's not particularly interested, they'll ignore the time plan. They'll do all the assets in a few hours or whatever. Having those moments for reflection, having the champions or your managers to understand the process that the new starter or whatever's going through, and actually supporting them and giving them a structured approach to it is critical to it actually working. So again, blended is treated like a panacea, but actually there's so many nuances and subtleties that need to be taken care of to do it well.
Okay. So I guess, we talked about kind of L&D, and you said, the rebel in you wants to kind of, it'd be good for you to rip it all out everywhere. And I think this rebel, creative, curious spark is something we have and we bring from our childhood. So I guess the question that's just dropped to mind now is, can you remember the very first time you ever got in trouble as a child?
Gosh, the one that sprung to my head is quite bad, actually.
Go for it. Let's do it. Fundamentally the main reason why it should be in it.
I think I remember there was a couple of us in junior school playing around with a door, and I think I just pulled it closed onto this girl's finger and just crushed it. But I'm fairly sure I got told off before then by my parents. But that's the first thing that popped into my head.
But it's interesting, right? It's interesting kind of how a simple question can take you right back to a memory, which takes you right back to a recall. And I just find it interesting kind of remembering the first time you ever got in trouble.
Actually, I probably got a bit of a more funny one.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you remember Flick Flack watches?
Yeah.
They sort of learn to tell the time on them. And it said they were water resistant. So the first thing I did was took it home. My parents bought me one, and I must have been pretty young, and just put it under the tap in the bathroom to see if it was water resistant and how long it would survive for. So I think I've always had that that kind of mindset to challenge and explore and see how things work, and also try and push the rules a bit.
But I think it's interesting. I think when, if you was to say map out your timeline from, say, childhood to now, it took some various, random turns and things which won't be predicted. But I think it's interesting how you find yourself in a position now where you can be that. I kind of, my granddad used to always call me the mad scientist. And it's fundamentally because it was kind of, let's see what works, let's see what happens, let's see if this will happen, let's see if that happen. And fundamentally, if I look at, say, my career, it's took some random turns, but when I look at where I am at now, every single touch point, if you like, every single place where I ended up, I've took something from it and brought it into where I am now. And I think it's just a really interesting thing how kind of even at your childhood, to a point, your destination of where you're gonna go to will always put you kind of right back to, for example, with you, kind of curious and challenging. I think it's a really interesting thing to look at, but just a personal interest, I guess.
Yeah, and I think mad scientist is a pretty good logline for you, Danny.
So if I was to say to you, right, let's think of your biggest client. In fact, no, let's go bigger. Let's go 1 million people. 1 million people is going to come out of a stadium, could be a football stadium or whatever, and they're going to see this billboard. And this billboard is yours. You can do anything you want. It doesn't even have to be a message. You can make it engageable. You can do whatever else. What would you put on that billboard to shape or engage 1 million people?
Oh, it's just got to say, look up, right?
Okay.
Just mess with everybody a little bit. If you've got that kind of attention and that ability, just do something fun.
Okay, I like it. Did you see the one what British Airways did recently? With the little kid,
the baby looking at the plane. Yeah.
I thought that was genius.
Yeah,
it was so good. It was so good. Okay, look up. I like it.
So that's from Garfield, right? Isn't it, from back in the day with Odie? They're looking at the roof until John looks up as well, and they start laughing at him.
I can't even remember that, but it's just added a nice layer on top of that for sure. So if I was to say to you, okay, Matt, explain what you do to a child, a 5-year-old child, how would you explain what you do?
I wish I could say help people do their jobs better, but even a child would say why. So I'd like to say play with cool things to make them more interesting.
Okay. And would you say you get to do that in your job right now?
I think my job is to challenge and really help people see things maybe slightly differently than how they might have done before. And maybe that's just my ego, but I like to think that some of our clients come to us for that reason.
Okay. So kind of coming back into this L&D world right now, and what do you think is L&D's problem?
I think it's fear. We all get paid, to do the same thing. I mentioned this to you before. We're still getting our bonuses for delivering, I'm not going to say ineffective things, but things we don't know whether they're working or not. And no one's checking and no one's asking. So the industry self-perpetuates. And if you put your head above the parapet, it just suddenly means you're a target. So I think you get rewarded for not doing that.
Okay. So how do we overcome it?
Bravery. Just let the little bit of maverick inside you run free, or the freak flag fly if you're Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Okay. So I mean, it's interesting, right? I think there's always brave people, and there's always people who sit on the fence, and there's always the people who kind of, have a fear embedded deep within. But do you think our industry as a whole, and this is very general, but do you think our industry as a whole creates that environment for bravery to occur?
I think industries and corporates as a whole stop people from doing that. I don't think that's an L&D thing. And you were saying earlier on actually about marketing and all those different areas. I think you'd be doing them a bit too much justice. I think if you looked at other industries and other teams, you'd find just as much, mid-level capability as we do in L&D. I think it's rife everywhere. Okay. And my personal view is we spend so much time at work, and I've had so many jobs where I wasn't myself and didn't feel like I could be, that now it's sort of it makes me sad to think that people go to work and they're not having fun with it.
Okay, so kind of coming up, I guess, a layer down from kind of L&D's problem. What's Media's problem at the moment, and kind of what's one of the biggest challenges you've been facing? And maybe we don't go personal, because we talked about your leadership and kind of that's new to you and stuff, but yeah, what's the problems what media are facing now? Maybe challenge is positive, right? So maybe it's a positive challenge what they're going through, but what is that like?
Well, I think there's loads. I mean, from a business perspective, it's our growth. We're a small company, we're constantly growing. How do we put in those processes to keep it all together as we grow, but without overlaying it? Not leaning on bureaucracy and keeping the startup like mentality, but making sure the wheels stay on. But the second one is more existential. And I was chatting to my MD about it yesterday. Is we're in a traditional industry. We're creating products. The world is moving very, very quickly away from physical assets. So how do we as a business keep up with that pace of change, and what are we going to offer? As the world moves. And it's a fascinating kind of thing that we were looking at the kind of Netflix idea of, there was a plan to create something in 10 years' time that wasn't possible with the technology that was available when that company first started as a DVD selling company.
It's an interesting one, and it kind of leads into that. What is the future of L&D, future of learning, and future of kind of, it's hard to predict the future. I guess we can look at indicators, and it's probably, and even then, but, fundamentally, you can have kind of, a black swan event and it completely flips it on its head. But I guess, for maybe it's for you or Media Zoo, however you want to approach this one, but What do you see the future of learning to be? And actually, is the future of learning not learning, or does it
I
belong
think
with L&D, or does it not?
I think the future of learning is people. You know, as technology evolves, and I'm certainly not the kind of the biggest mind on this one, and you know, people like Toby Harris and can talk a lot more about it. But I truly believe that as technology advances, that service is going to become more and more critical, and the human element of that service and our ability to arbitrate and I guess curate is going to be absolutely the key part of success or failure within that industry.
So, playing devil's advocate here. So I guess my challenge on that one would be, surely the people have always been the focus of L&D right now, you know, from past to where we are right now. But you know, if we kind of always do what we've always done, we'll always get with what we've always got. And I completely agree. You know, we've looking at what filters are doing and whatnot, and kind of that, you know, service, you know, what we would do normally, as soon as it'll become the next kind of the next service approach, and it's just another service, and it's just one of the things what we take for granted, and we see that already in our consumer experience. But if I was to push a little bit more and say, okay, take humans out of it, what then? Because, you know, humans to this aren't new. So kind of, what is it? Is it deeper? So for me, you know, if someone was to ask me, I'd say it's uber personalization. But in order to get it out, then we need to have our human touch on the fact that people aren't going to be as easy as handing over data in order to get that personalization. You know, it's that kind of balancing act. But if I was to push a little bit more on that, Matt, how could you kind of elaborate, I guess, a bit more?
That's where you get me to start saying really sort of challenging things where I'm at the limit of my knowledge. But I truly think so. The world of education is ripe for being completely disrupted. You know, I think education is broken. We all know it. No one, you know, particularly thinks it works, but it's better than the education system we don't have. So I think there is a way of using technology to genuinely personalize people's journeys, to, you know, to help them develop at the pace they need to work at. So I guess it becomes then enabling a teacher to teach 30 people of varying ages and abilities, but without having to move them all at the same pace. So I think that could be a hugely powerful use of technology. But again, I think that the teacher becomes central to making that as a person connecting to another person, absolutely critical in using technology sensibly.
So kind of, I guess, kind of looking at approach. I was talking to I had a guy on the podcast, David. He was talking about, actually, he's addressing that problem right now, stateside, and you know, we've got a podcast coming up with him later on. Well, they'll get launched around about the same time as these. But he was talking about exactly that thing what you just mentioned there, Matt, and kind of saying, actually, how do we make, you know, education more personalised, and actually how do we kind of, you know, you look at these schools and actually addressing that bringing the virtual school, so to speak, to home. And one of the things which I kind of got thinking about later on down the line was, actually, as soon as you do that, you're going to kill all the social aspect of what is good about schools. You know, fundamentally, there's, you know, while there is knowledge and learning, I guess, there's also the massive social element and learning how to engage with people and how not to engage, and the social kind of nuances of you know, growing up. So I think it's spot on. I think, you know, it's interesting looking at that education, but I think it's gonna be another I guess wicked problem on how do you bring that but still keep that social element intact, because, you know, I guess what you don't want is a lot of people who stay at home and learn at home and have no social, you know, have no personal drive to kind of, you know, go out and get that social element, what they're lacking in, what they're missing in from school.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think every road you go down, there'll be a huge challenge either way. And I'm not sure if you've read Nick Shackleton Jones's book yet, but
Yeah.
I love that idea, you know, and that's all based around those, you know, experiences and social kind of the emotional effect of it all. But then you talk to a teacher about that, and they'll just say, "But we've got this huge curriculum I've got to deliver in a year, and I can't lose a day." So it's a fascinating world where how do you make one thing fit for everyone when we know it doesn't work? And I guess that's the problem from the start, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, kind of, experiences of, experience design for me is when someone says to me, what is the future? I'd say it's the experience economy. It's not this kind of service adaptation. It's kind of this thing of experiences. We've seen it already, as we tend to do. There's a lot of industries which are always way ahead and kind of shaping these experiences. And I guess I kind of talk about the fact of experiences open the door to allow change in. But it's kind of, I think one of the biggest challenges what we get with experience design, I guess, is scale and scaling them experience designs. And it's totally doable. I've done it in my career numerous times. It's totally doable. But I think the bigger question is actually when it comes to kind of stakeholders and getting stakeholder buy-in for experience, it's kind of, I think the challenge doesn't become the scale of experiences and experience design. It's kind of challenging the stakeholder's mindset to that, because fundamentally, if you look at where they're at now, they're probably just expecting a shitload of assets and content, and that's yeehaw, off you go.
Yeah, expectation setting is the ultimate challenge when it comes to that, and even your own. We limit ourselves so much by limiting our own creativity and our own bit. What could we achieve? And that's where I love some of the marketing view of that. The creatives in the ad industry, their whole job is to just look around, filter, think, store, sleep, and come back and kind of borrow, beg, and steal from everywhere to create new connections, which are new ideas. And that is how and unfortunately it's a bit of trial and error. That we try things that don't always work. But I think the saddest thing we could ever do is not try for the sake of, ticking off a list of things.
Yeah, and I guess this comes down to that kind of constant iteration and change, and try it. If it fails, let's tweak, adapt, go again. And it comes down to that constant iteration. But I think it comes down to this. The business say it's okay to do that, but then but it's a bit like that reality versus Instagram, right? The business message versus the business reality is, well, yeah, go out and try it, and if it fails, great. But then does a business culture kind of allow for that as much as a business message? I think there's a bit of a mismatch in them two things alone.
Yeah, but that again is where bravery just becomes so important. That's the one behavior that separates, I think, really forward-thinking companies from the ones that aren't, or forward-thinking people, is that ability to go, okay, you don't want to do this, but I'm going to press this because I think it's really important. And I think ultimately you'll end up in finding out that situations aren't for you or whatever like that, and it is tricky, obviously, and there's lots of things and lots of politics to play around. But it does remind me that someone asked me a really good question about user-centered design and agile and things like that, was, what about those poor people who get the first iteration of your product that might not be correct? And I was just sort of there, and it's like, but what about the people that get your only version of your product and you assume it's correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, well, it's better to kind of have 5 people not have that great products rather than 250 people who's going to have this one-stop, this kind of, this unicorn, what they think is going to fix all the problems without any feedback. Yeah.
And I've never found anyone in a business who hasn't been open to the idea of trying new things if you make it easy for them. So, and I think this is a David James thing, isn't it? Is that that do you want to make it easy for you and make it hard for your users, or do you want to do a bit more work and make it easy for your users?
Yeah.
And I think it's so worth doing that, making the extra effort, and putting the time and effort in to open people's minds to try new things.
So I guess kind of coming a little bit out of L&D now, and thinking about you personally, what's some of the things what is capturing your attention at the moment? And again, yeah, let's do. It can be personal, professional, but maybe it's some, I don't know, some tools, some stuff, something. You know, it can be resources, whatever. But what's capturing your attention and kind of getting you sparking and thinking about things differently?
I mean, for me, it's almost always books. At the minute, I'm reading the follow up to the Silk Roads, which is sort of the new history of the world, looking at it from the Middle East rather than from the West, and the kind of the second version of it is just looking at the modern world, which is just fascinating about how politics and culture and you know all these things have a macro and micro effect on the whole world. But yeah, there was and podcasts. I've really got into podcasts. Unfortunately, I'm still listening to loads of really geeky business ones, but I love walking now and just listening to stuff, which is something I never thought I'd do a few years ago.
Yes, podcasts are kind of I'll probably say probably for the last couple of years been my number one go-to. And again, it's a lot of time it's not even work related. Do you listen to Radiolab?
No, what's that?
Okay, so get Radiolab on there for sure. So Radiolab is I love their editing style. But it's all different things. It's not necessarily just one thing. So like a couple of months ago, I was talking about, you know, when dinosaurs, you know, when impact happened and kind of dinosaurs got wiped out, we've never been really truly been able to kind of predict what happened after it. And well, not been able to sit back and go, actually, let's have a look what happened straight after it. And what they think now is they've got insight and data to kind of show what happened within, you know, from the moment of impact right up to a couple of hours. And it talks about kind of, I don't want to spoil it because it's been one of my favourite episodes of them. But yeah, it's interesting to talk about kind of, there's a layer of, so you got like the sand and whatever else, and then they've got this layer of soil, and then from that layer of soil, no dinosaurs' bones have ever been found below that layer. So it kind of starts showing you how they're using data to kind of start shaping it, and things like they found, because the impact happened so quick, all the fishes were kind of facing one way, and it's showing how they was all kind of piled on top of each other, showing like it was just a mass blast. And then it talks about how the earth heated up, and it's a really good episode, that for sure.
Yeah, that sounds right up my street. There was a TV show I think on iPlayer I watched a couple of months ago, which was about the Big Bang, and they went to the crater site. But I've always wondered, actually, like if crocodiles and sharks are really, really old, how did we evolve from those kind of the few animals that survived the Big Bang? And I don't know enough about biology and the history and stuff, but it fascinates me how we've evolved over millions and millions of years.
Yeah, I think you're going to love that episode. They do some really good episodes. Like another good one's called Reveal as well. That's like journalist storytelling.
Yeah.
And they do ones kind of about one of my favorite episodes then was about the mass fires, what happened in LA, and it's all kind of accounts from the people who was in it. So it's great. I say it's great. That was quite a depressing example, but it's a really good podcast, especially if you want to switch off from kind of work stuff. So yeah, definitely check them two out.
Awesome. Yeah, cheers. I should probably say as well, I think it was your show that really got me into podcasts. So thank you.
All right. Okay. I will take that for sure. Cheers, man. So what's your biggest 80-20 hack? And, I kind of always use this analogy of 20% of the contacts you'll call 80% of the time, and 80% of the contacts on your phone you'll only call 20. So what's the one small thing you do which kind of gives you back either 80% of your time or kills 80% of your work, or what?
It's probably a bit cheesy and a bit obvious, but for me it's delegating. Realizing that I've got a team of people who are better than me at a lot of things. So most of our brilliant work comes from me holding on to it and giving it to others.
Okay. So why do you think people should get into our industry? And I say our industry, and I'm going to wrap it in L&D terms, but I think personally I'm much more of an L&D, but let's just keep it as L&D. Why should people why should people bother about getting into where we are now, especially with, all the other cool roles what are out there and all the, new up and coming things to do and kind of get involved with? Why should people bother?
I think there's a few bits of it really. One is the fact that you really can make a difference and make people's experience in work better and more fun and more interesting. And you can also help them do their jobs better, which, is really rewarding. But the other bit is that I think you and I are really good examples of is that the industry is open to listen, and you can say pretty crazy stuff. And we're able to sit here and chat about it and explore it, and no one's shouting at us, telling us we're wrong. And most people are really receptive about having a conversation about it. And I find that, it's really powerful.
Question for you, deep one. Do you even like yourself?
Sometimes not.
Okay. Care to elaborate a little bit more?
I think I'm quite driven by a desire to move and change. So when I feel like sometimes I'm overly critical and negative of myself, but then other times I think that's a really important part of my character that's led me to where I am. So it's I guess it's a yin and yang type thing, to be really, really on the fence about it.
No, that's a great place to be sometimes. Sometimes it's a good place to be. So, you kind of already mentioned you're kind of quite active on LinkedIn, which anyone who isn't following you, I recommend they should follow you. But kind of, what's your take on social media and its social media within? Yeah, what's your take on L&D's social media presence and the behaviours you see from the L&D industry on social media?
Well, I think there's a bit of bandwagon jumping in some respects, but I've recently deleted all of my social media apart from LinkedIn. So I'm not really sure what's happening out there, and I'm being willfully ignorant for my own benefit. But yeah, I think you said it earlier, and it works really well before we press record. Is that I think there's a great number of people sharing really interesting things, and I learned so much from spending time on LinkedIn. But also, I think there is a bit of a fear where others feel they can't join in. So it's kind of I wish people would be more a bit more open and not be afraid of what their thoughts and feelings are.
Okay, so kind of. You mentioned you kind of removed all your social media apart from LinkedIn. So I kind of removed Facebook probably about 6 months ago and did not miss it. And then I've ended up joining it again just because there's a group I wanted to be part of on Facebook, which is a really bizarre group. But how are you finding kind of switching off kind of all your social media channels, I guess?
It's tough. I don't miss them. And I think I've got exactly the same thing as that, where I used to be part of these weird, like left-handed guitar groups. So I miss that. And I miss not finding out about bands when they're touring and the day the tickets go on sale or got new albums coming out. But what I don't miss is sat on my phone of an evening just scrolling through endless nonsense and have a bit of breathing space. Life is pretty hectic, and living in the city, it's kind of fast-paced. And it's really nice to not have those added layers of things that really weren't making me feel good.
Yeah, I think social media does a great job of kind of not allowing us to be bored, which is a very bad thing. I think I think a lot of us have forgot how to be bored, and
I think no one's forgotten how to be bored.
Yeah, to be bored and kind of and enjoy being bored. I think I can remember when I was a kid, and like I remember it used to be maybe a Sunday or Saturday, and maybe I'd just come in from making a den with my mates and whatnot. But kind of, I remember having them bored moments, and I think I can remember because I put time in to kind of be bored, so to speak. But actually, I think in our hectic lives now, if you turn around to people and said, "When was the last time you were truly bored?" I think they'll be hard pushed to kind of come up with a moments now.
Yeah, and I can't remember who said it, but someone said social media will be the death of invention. In that all of the big eureka moments in our history have come from, admittedly, the middle classes, but them having free time and just to wander about and let all the stuff that they've read filter and swirl into a new thing. So, and I guess invention has changed because we're doing it by deliberate action, aren't we? Like the Googles and people like that have people who are constantly trying experiments to get new ideas, but it just sort of feels a bit like we feel that we have to fill every single moment of our lives right now. And I used to do that, and I didn't, it didn't make me feel good. So it's really nice to sit down, and just go, right, what am I going to do? Nothing.
Yeah, make yourself some green tea on a Friday evening.
No red wine, yeah.
So I guess it kind of got me thinking, we kind of talk about having this time out and being bored again. But if I was to say to you, right, Matt, here's a thing. World's ended and you've got to leave a list of instructions to jumpstart the next generation. What would your instructions be to them people?
Be nice to each other.
Okay.
Don't take it all so seriously. And read more.
Okay, beautiful.
Unless if there's any books left, that is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then in that case, just draw. It's just as good.
Or write something for others to read.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So kind of, who's the 5 people you would recommend everyone should follow? And this can be new up and comers. It could be people in different industries. It can be people who you follow and aren't new to it. Who's the 5 people you recommend everyone should follow?
5 people.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to use my fingers here. So I think the first one I'd say is my boss, Rachel Pendred. We've spoken a bit about Media Zoo. They're a totally unique company, and what Rachel's vision and kind of drive has done. We've got 2 of the most prestigious corporate film awards currently, and I don't think any agency's ever held them at the same time. And it's all down to her, her passion and her drive and her ability to just set us all free. So Rachel's a fascinating person to follow, who probably doesn't get as much credit as she should, and gave me the chance to do this crazy stuff myself. Another one is a guy I've mentioned, Perry Timms, just one of the original thinkers of the world. He totally transformed my thinking on everything. Peter Manish-Reba, if you want someone who's going to tell you how it is, he's your man. I love his view on things. And that's 3, isn't it? I'm not going to do any of the really obvious ones that we've all said 1,000 times, and I've mentioned a few other names already in this podcast, like Nick and David James. So I'm going to go with some of my friends then. Laurie Niles Hoffman, she's awesome. She's got such a cool view on how corporate. Harris, one of the smartest dudes. Every time I talk to him, I learn something new, and I always turn to him when I've got a bit of one of those ones where I'm scratching my head, and I'm literally, it's beyond me. He can usually explain to me pretty clearly what something means when it's beyond the wit of my little brain.
Who was that again? Sorry, Matt, you broke up when you said.
Toby Harris.
Toby Harris. Yeah, he's a good guy, Toby. Definitely a good guy. Okay, so I guess we're kind of coming to the end now, Matt. And right at the start of the show, I asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up. But as you know, we never continue to we never really stop growing, and we continue to develop and grow. So if I was to ask you now, Matt, what do you want to be when you grow up? What is it you would say?
Gosh, yeah. If I ever grow up, I think I just want to be. I want to be an explorer.
Okay, an explorer. I like that. I like it. Is this an explorer of ideas or explorer of adventure? What are we thinking?
If I don't specify, it means I could actually possibly do it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I think there's a club in Mayfair, or there used to be, called the Explorers Club, and you used to have to sail across the Atlantic to be a member. So I'd kind of like to imagine that maybe if I sailed across the Atlantic, I could join them.
I love it. That sounds like a great experience and a great club to be part of for sure. So I asked you to pick some numbers right at the very start, and I guess these numbers tie to some random items on my list. And the story is you're on a desert island and you find these items. So you have number 13 was a woman's blouse. Number 25 was a nail file. Number 7 was an ice cube. Don't know how long that's going to last. And the last one was number 64, and that was a pencil. What are you doing with these items, Matt?
Wow. I think I'd suck the ice cube to stay cool because it'd be hot. I'm a bit of a fashion victim, so I'd try on the blouse to see if I just look cool because that made me feel better about being there. And then I'd probably use the pencil and nail file as drumsticks to just hit out a little beat on a tree. So essentially, I think I'd be channeling my inner Sting, and because he used to wear sort of oversized shirts in the 80s. I'm hoping the women's blouse is oversized when I say that. And I'd just keep myself entertained for a short period of time.
Okay. Couldn't have answered it better myself. So Matt, where can people keep up to date with what you're working on and your ideas and stuff? Where can we find you?
So LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on there. Otherwise you can get hold of me via the Mediazoo website. I think my email address is on there under the people section. So love talking to people and geeking out about this stuff, as you well know.
Yes, for sure. Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It's an honour to be on this. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Cheers, Matt. You enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Dan. You too.
Bye-bye.